Senator Welch, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses. It's very helpful. You know, there's a couple of things that come to mind as I'm listening. Obviously, if China infiltrates, there's national security risk, there's infrastructure risk, there's company security risk, and then potentially individuals. Mr. Lewis, you said that there's not any, you don't know why, or China doesn't even know why they might try to get individual consumer information or citizen information. Is there evidence that they're trying to do that specifically?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Unfortunately, there is.
So why would they want somebody's information in Norwich, Vermont, let's say? And what information is it that they'd be going after?
Well, you could improve your intelligence analysis. You could better identify targets for some sort of covert action.
I don't get that. I mean, that sounds like it's specific. I mean, if you randomly get somebody, like you throw a dart at the old phone book and you get a name and you come up with some information, how's that going to help you do anything?
Because the technology allows it, because the same way that Amazon or Google can track tens of millions of people and say, this is what they want for Christmas, this is what they want for, in their stocking, that is something that the Chinese are able to do. So they're looking for political benefit.
All right, so how do we deal with this? There's always going to be an effort to infiltrate, right, by adversaries, and China is very aggressive, and you've talked about that. But what's the best way to deal with that, and who bears the burden? I mean, the big telecom companies are the ones that have the systems in place.
Thank you.
As opposed to a small individual consumer.
I think one of the things that we've all said is that this requires a national response to change Chinese behavior. A phone company going to China and saying, please stop, they'll just laugh.
Well, that's the deny and deterrence that you were talking about. I get that. So there'd be a national response if we're going to try to punish China or another adversary by infecting their systems. But what's the deterrence? What's the deny? I mean, who's responsible to set up a denial system?
Well, there are a couple things you could do, and this administration has made some progress, and it's probable that the next administration will continue it. Here's a good example. When this last transition occurd, there was a company called SolarWinds that was hacked. One of the targets now is Gopher, the third-party service providers, because you hack once and you get hundreds of targets. SolarWinds had a password for their updater. It was SolarWinds 123, right? That's not going to stymie the Chinese or the Russians for very long. You had the OPM hack, where 17 million Americans, including I think some of us on this panel, had our information taken.
Let me go to Mr. Sherman. I was going to go, you and then Mr. Mulvern.
I think it's two things, right? As we're saying, we have to identify where are companies not following best practices. How do we require to raise the floor? Again, I don't think we should be writing 8,000 bullet points down and putting it in a law that doesn't change. But we can't keep doing this voluntary business anymore, where companies don't have any requirements in critical infrastructure sectors, and some they do, right? But where they don't, we can't do this voluntary thing anymore.
All right, so how do we hold them accountable, and how do we impose that obligation?
Yeah. As one of my fellow witnesses mentioned, federal contracting is a huge way of getting that language in. You can do ongoing audits in ways that are, right, there's tons of technology now, innovative stuff from the private sector to do ongoing auditing anyway. Lots of companies do this. So it's not like you're adding on some massive cost necessarily to go in as the government or somebody and take a look at what those metrics are looking like.
But the burden would be on those companies to do that.
To improve the baseline, absolutely. Yeah.
Mr. Mullen, and you were going to look like you wanted to answer this too, but before you do, one of the huge concerns I have is the things that Mr. Donovan's talking about. I'm from Vermont, rural area, it's small, and there's no way our small companies can bear the regulatory burdens that might be associated with best practices for national security. They just can't do it. And the bottom line then is that people who need access to the internet won't have it. So maybe you can address that, Mr.
I agree with you, Senator. In fact, what we've said from the beginning is even the large carriers, even the tier ones, are not technically capable of withstanding the determined efforts of a state-based cyber actor. And so that shouldn't be the standard. I would push back a little bit on the idea of why the Chinese are gathering this information. The OPM hack, which stole the personal information of everyone in the U.S. government at the time who had a security clearance, combined with the Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield hack, the Anthem hack, the Experian financial data hack, based on what I do for a living, if I had that information about an adversary, I would have a highly precise and detailed understanding that would allow me to do a range of targeting of those individuals. The amount of data that Americans have out in the wild that could then be put together in ways that could be used for recruitment, for disruption of what they're doing. And so if you have all of that data to begin with, and then you have Assault Typhoon, where knowing already all of the personal information necessary to then drill into the tier one provider's customer records to be able to identify who then you want to actually listen to the phone calls of and be able to listen to the voicemails of, that's exactly the intelligence sequence that you would need to be able to do that.
So basically, it adds up.
Absolutely.
Okay, I yield back. Thank you.
Can I add one thing, Senator?
Sure.
One of the reasons I think we're all frustrated is that we actually know what to do now. And so between NSA, the Australian Signals Directorate, other partners, we've identified the minimal number of steps that will reduce the effectiveness of most cyber attacks by 80 to 90%. There's something called known exploitable vulnerabilities program that some of the private companies do. We know how to lower the threats considerably. We just aren't doing it.
Thank you, Senator. Senator